I arrived in Manchester on a Tuesday. The sky was low, a soft, pervasive grey that clung to the industrial skyline. It was the kind of sky that whispered of rain, but held back, leaving the air heavy and quiet. This was a business trip, a necessary week away from the soft chaos of our London flat, a mix of professional focus and the low-level ache of missing Andrew. Andrew, my Andrew. Andrew Walker, the photographer, 32 years old, with eyes that saw the world in shades of light I could only guess at. He was the man who had captured the light with his lens, and more importantly, the man I believed had captured my heart without even trying. Our life together had always been like this Manchester sky, gentle, steady, utterly reliable. There was no drama, no sharp edges, just a calm, enduring certainty. I'm 27, a marketing strategist, and by nature, I am reserved. I am the kind of person who instinctively seeks harmony, who chooses a quiet peace over any form of confrontation. Andrew, with his gentle, slightly brooding artist soul, was my opposite and my anchor. He was the gentle wind that moved me, and I was the solid ground he returned to. That morning, at London Euston Station, just before my train to the north pulled out, he'd called. His voice, still thick with sleep, was a comforting blanket wrapped around my ears. "Are you settled, my love?" I smiled into the phone, watching the blur of commuters and luggage. "Yes, darling, just waiting for departure." The usual pre-trip nervous energy. "I'm going to miss you, Claire. 3 years. 3 years." And that simple line still made my heart do that familiar, foolish little flip. "I'll miss you too. Terribly. The flat's going to feel empty. Stay safe. You're meeting the new team. Be brilliant, but don't work too late. And call me as soon as you check into the hotel. I promise." "What are you doing today? Shooting the new gallery piece?" "Something like that. Capturing the mundane, but trying to make it beautiful, like always." He laughed, a low, sweet sound. "I love you. I love you too. Hurry back to me." It was our ritual, simple, predictable. A quiet assurance that, no matter the distance or the days apart, our world, our small, perfect bubble, was fundamentally safe. It was built on absolute trust. When I arrived at Manchester Piccadilly, the industrial grid of the city seemed to sharpen the cold air. I was met by a young man named Leo, one of the assistants Andrew frequently used for his northern contracts. Andrew had a lot of work in this region, and his local team was always, as he put it, briefed to take care of Claire. Leo was instantly likable. He was energetic, talkative, and he whisked my suitcase away with a grin. He drove me through the wet, slick streets to my hotel, constantly chattering about Andrew's latest accolades. "Andrew says you're his best critic," he joked, giving me a quick, admiring glance as he carried my bag to the reception desk. He basically told us to roll out the red carpet. "You're the VIP." I felt a surge of warmth, flattered, protected, loved. Andrew, always thinking of me, always making sure I felt secure even when he wasn't physically there. That evening, the welcome dinner was in the northern quarter, in a trendy bistro, all exposed brick, low lighting, and high-volume chatter. There were about 10 of us. The new project partners, a few members of Andrew's Manchester creative team, and me. The wine, a sharp, excellent Washington State Merlot, strangely, was flowing freely. The conversation was loud, warm, and engaging. I felt my tense shoulders drop, the fatigue from the journey slowly melting away. I was chatting easily with the project director, a sharp, elegant woman named Sophie, about the nuances of the campaign, when the conversation dipped and then, fatally, Leo intervened. He had clearly had too much of the Merlot. His cheeks were flushed, his gestures expansive. He seized a glass and raised it a little unsteadily. "Speaking of going viral," he announced, a little too loudly, his eyes sweeping the table. "A toast. A cheer to our hidden poet. The new posts from John Shoots the Moon are absolutely mental. I think this is the one. Guys, it's blowing up. It's going to be a phenomenon." The noise of the bistro, the background hum of plates and music, continued unabated. But at our table, a silence fell. It was not a long silence. It was minuscule, perhaps half a second, but it felt as absolute as a vacuum. It was a tiny, involuntary, collective gasp, and in that infinitesimal space of time, a blip, a fraction, every single pair of eyes at the table, all 9 of them, turned toward me. It wasn't a stare. It was a reflexive, instantaneous flicker, like 9 tiny camera shutters flashing and closing at once. Then, they looked away. It was a scramble of averted gazes. Sophie's eyes, which had been fixed on mine, snapped down to her wineglass. Another colleague, a quiet graphic designer, suddenly coughed into his hand. Leo's face, already red from the wine, somehow managed to deepen its hue. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights, terrified, but mostly guilty. I didn't understand the mechanism of the reaction, not immediately. John Shoots the Moon? The name meant nothing. A new photographer? An esoteric art project Andrew had mentioned in passing? My brain, trained to seek patterns and logic, scrambled for a connection. I kept the smile on my face. I am good at maintaining a facade. Years of navigating high-stakes corporate conversations had taught me to control my micro-expressions. John Shoots the Moon? I asked, my voice light, casual, maybe a touch too bright. Who is that? Sounds like a band. The relief at the table was palpable, almost a physical wave. They collectively exhaled. Leo stammered, his earlier confidence completely gone. Oh, nobody, Claire. Just a poetry account. Andrew's studio follows him. Just inspirational content we talk about. Sophie, bless her professional heart, leapt in like a seasoned firefighter. Her voice was firm, pulling the attention back to the project. Leo, that's enough. Leave the social media drama alone. Claire, let's go over tomorrow's schedule. You'll join us for the site visit at 9, yes? I nodded, the smile still stitched to my mouth. Of course, 9. The conversation resumed, a little too loud, a little too quickly, trying to erase the tiny poisoned moment. Laughter returned, but it was thinner now, brittle, but something had shattered inside me. The air had changed color, the way they had looked at me, the immediate, collective shame of it, the subtle glances of pity, embarrassment, conspiracy. The cold knot in my stomach tightened, a hard, sharp marble of suspicion. Why were they looking at me? Why had the name, that ridiculous, whimsical name, made the entire table seize up? I kept talking, kept nodding, kept smiling, but my mind was playing the scene in a loop. Leo's genuine, frightened apology in his eyes. Sophie's aggressive attempt to bury the topic. The awkward glances of the others, as if they were worried about my reaction to a known fact. They knew something, they were all in on something, and that something was about me. An hour later, I excused myself. I blamed the journey, the time difference, which was non-existent, but it served the purpose. Leo apologized profusely again for boring me with internet nonsense, and the anxious sincerity in his voice only twisted the suspicion tighter. I walked back to the hotel alone, through the cool Manchester night. The air was misty, the kind that dampens the sounds of the street, making everything feel muffled and distant. The street lamps glowed in soft, lonely halos. The name echoed in my head, a drumbeat of paranoia. John Shoots the Moon. I had the sudden chilling thought. Andrew John Walker. Andrew's middle name was John. A coincidence. It had to be. A simple, silly coincidence. I tried to construct a wall of logic. Andrew loved me. He'd said it that very morning. Our life was dull. I was tired. My mind was inventing drama where there was none. But the cold knot in my gut was a physical reality. It refused to dissolve. Back in the sterile, silent hotel room, I moved through the motions of unwinding. I unpacked, smoothed the wrinkles from my clothes, and laid them out for the morning. I brushed my teeth, staring into the bright, unforgiving mirror. I resisted for 10 long, agonizing minutes. I told myself, don't look, don't do it, just call Andrew. Hear his voice, be reassured. But I couldn't call him. If I called and asked about John Shoots the Moon, and if there was genuinely nothing, I would sound like a petty, jealous fool, shattering the very trust I was trying to preserve. But if there was something, he would simply lie, and I wouldn't know how to look for the truth once the alarm had been sounded. The only way to know the truth was to find it in the quiet. My fingers, strangely cold, despite the room's warmth, picked up my phone. The screen flashed bright. I opened X, the social media platform I rarely used, the one that deals in raw words and sharp images. Unlike the soft curation of Instagram, the search bar, white and empty, stared back, waiting for the poison. I typed it out. Each key press was a tiny metallic chime in the silence. JOHNSHOOTS. THEMOON. I didn't hesitate. I couldn't. My curiosity had curdled into a cold, desperate need. I pressed search. The search results loaded instantly. It wasn't a band, it wasn't a local Manchester project, it was exactly what Leo had called it: a poetry account, a visual diary, a curated intimate space. And it was wildly popular. The handle, @JohnShoots, the moon, sat above a bio that read, "The hidden world is the only one worth capturing. Light seeks shadow, and shadow keeps the secrets." The profile picture was a silhouette of a man holding a camera against a dramatically lit crescent moon, an image so perfectly composed, so intensely focused on capturing a singular, impossible moment that it screamed Andrew. My heart was no longer merely knotting. It was hammering against my ribs, a trapped bird, desperate to escape. I scrolled down, my breath catching in my throat with every post. The feed was a masterful blend of photography and short, evocative poetry. It was art, raw and beautiful. Andrew had always possessed that kind of profound, almost painful artistry. This wasn't just a random account. This was the language of someone I knew intimately. But speaking of things I didn't know at all, I read the captions. She stands in the rain, but her storm is only internal. I watched the way the light catches the sorrow she holds close. Posted 3 weeks ago. The shadow of the other side of the bed, it's always there, isn't it? The space where the absence lives. I capture the quiet echo. Posted just 5 days before I left London. They weren't just poems. They were confessions. They were tender, aching observations of intimacy, of deep, shared secrets, of a love that was clearly being experienced, chronicled, and preserved. And they were not about me. My mind fought back, trying desperately to rationalize. He's an artist. He's observing. It's fiction. It's just his creative outlet. But the very familiarity of the aesthetic betrayed the logic. The clean lines, the contrast of light and shadow, the particular, almost painful way the poetry dissected human emotion. It was Andrew's signature, deeper than any watermark. Then I saw the photographs. They weren't professional studio shots. They were candid, deeply personal. A coffee cup on a worn wooden desk, the light streaking through a window exactly like the light in our flat in London. A blurry shot of a woman's hand, delicate and pale, resting near an open book. A close-up of an unidentifiable woman's neck. The small, specific curve of her jawline. The focus of the account seemed to revolve around one singular, unseen muse. The woman in the mist. The poet referenced her constantly, writing about her eyes like veiled smoke, her sad smile, and the secret hours that don't exist on any calendar. A specific post stopped me cold. It was a photograph of a messy studio space. In the corner, barely visible, was a partially packed camera bag, Andrew's old leather bag, the one he always insisted on carrying. The caption read, "Leaving her for a short time always feels like tearing a page from a book before it's finished, but the resonance remains." I checked the timestamp. The post was barely 36 hours old. It was posted when Andrew was supposedly in London, preparing for a routine gallery meeting, an activity he'd been doing for years. Yet, the poem spoke of leaving her. A wave of nausea washed over me. The logical, harmony-seeking part of my brain was screaming for me to put the phone down, to delete the search history, to convince myself this was a huge, cruel misunderstanding. But the deep, cold knot of suspicion had become a solid piece of granite, weighing down my chest. I began to cross-reference the timelines. This became my frantic, obsessive ritual throughout the night. Andrew often vanished on Saturdays, claiming he was scouting locations or attending a rare private workshop near Birmingham. I always accepted it. He's an artist. He needs space. We trust each other. But now, matching Andrew's scouting days with the highly emotional posts from John Shoots the Moon created a grotesque and undeniable pattern. Andrew is away for the weekend, dealing with logistics. John Shoots the Moon posts a poem about a stolen sunset shared over a city view, the kind of quiet joy only the illicit know. Andrew calls me late, his voice tight, saying he's stuck in traffic after a shoot. John Shoots the Moon posts a photograph of a crumpled silk pillow with the caption, "The weight of a memory on a thin sheet." It wasn't just the words, or the style. It was the emotional geometry of the events. The posts were too precise, too emotionally congruent with the times Andrew was inaccessible, emotionally or physically. The woman? Who was she? I zoomed in on the photograph of the hand, trying to distinguish any unique markings, any rings. Nothing, just a graceful, unfamiliar hand. Not mine. My hands were smaller, with a distinctive small scar on my index finger from a childhood accident. This hand was unmarked, pristine, a clean slate, perhaps, for a hidden relationship. I remembered small, fleeting moments that I had dismissed as charming quirks, as the sudden brief glances Andrew would cast at his phone, the way he would instantly flip it face down if I walked into the room, the times he would use the term "my muse" in his general conversation, but the phrase always seemed to carry a weight, a private significance that didn't include me. I had simply thought he was being an eccentric artist. The truth, the hideous, blinding truth, was that those weren't quirks. They were signals. They were clues, scattered carelessly in plain sight, and I had been too committed to the narrative of our perfect, quiet life to pick them up. My commitment to peace had blinded me to the war happening around me. The things we do not want to see are often the things that have been right in front of us all along. The message I was meant to convey in this story hammered into my consciousness with brutal force. It wasn't Andrew who was hiding the most. It was me, hiding from the clear signs. My love for Andrew, my absolute certainty in our life, had become a voluntary muzzle on my own intuition. The memory of the dinner table, the collective awkwardness, the strained smiles, rushed back. They weren't looking at me because they knew Andrew was cheating. They were looking at me because they knew I was the only one who didn't. They pitied the fool. They pitied the woman living in a false reality. The one everyone else, from the lowliest studio assistant to the project director, could see through. Leo's panicked, wine-fueled slip wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was the revelation of the open secret, the sheer humiliation of it, the sickening realization that my domestic tragedy was trending online, known by strangers, and discussed with pity by my professional colleagues, was almost worse than the potential infidelity itself. I put the phone down, my hands finally shaking violently. The antiseptic white of the hotel room seemed to close in on me. I got up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the familiar mist of Manchester clung to the streetlights, giving the city a romantic, ethereal glow. But the romance was dead. The mist was no longer charming. It was a cloak of deception. I had come to Manchester seeking professional success and a quiet week of work. I had found, instead, the complete demolition of my life's foundation, laid bare by a random search on a social media app. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, my eyes wide, startled, suddenly seeing the world not through the soft lens of trust, but through the harsh, unsparing glare of betrayal. The knot in my stomach was now a deep, grinding pain. I had to know more. I had to face the man who had authored this parallel life. The phone lay beside me, glowing with the white light of the search results. A silent, damning witness. I couldn't sleep. The cold knot in my stomach was now a burning sickness, the adrenaline of confrontation and fear battling for supremacy. I spent the next hour in a meticulous, sickening excavation of Andrew's online alter ego, John Shoots the Moon. I found a photograph posted 4 months ago, a close-up of a cheap, chipped ceramic mug, the kind Andrew hated, sitting on a sun-drenched windowsill. The caption was cryptic. Some mornings, the silence is so loud, you can only listen to the crack in the porcelain. I had seen that mug before. Andrew's friend, Marcus, who lived in Liverpool, had mentioned it once, laughing about a terrible gift he'd received. Marcus. Andrew often went to Liverpool for art direction meetings that lasted 2 days. I had always assumed he stayed in a budget hotel. Why was he spending time in a place with a chipped mug that belonged to a mutual acquaintance? It suggested a domestic, shared space, a comfortable intimacy that was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. The pieces, which I had so carefully swept under the rug of trust, now clicked together with an audible, horrifying finality. I remembered a conversation from 6 months ago. We were sitting in our living room in London, watching a documentary about a famous, troubled author who maintained a secret life. I had turned to Andrew, seeking reassurance, a lover's game. You'd tell me, wouldn't you? I'd asked, softy. If you ever felt trapped, or if you needed something more, you wouldn't just start a separate life. Andrew had paused the movie, looked me right in the eye, and smiled that gentle artist smile. Never, Claire. My life is right here. My truth is you. I believed him then. I believed the depth of his gaze. I believed the absolute simplicity of his answer. Now, the memory felt like a theatrical performance, an award-winning lie delivered with stunning conviction. The phrase, the hidden world, is the only one worth capturing, from his bio, suddenly tasted like ash. It wasn't a poetic philosophy. It was a mission statement. I decided to test the atmosphere, and I wasn't ready to confront Andrew yet. I needed evidence beyond the beautifully written, ambiguous poetry. But I needed to know if the suspicion was shared, if my colleagues in Manchester were aware of the scope of the deception. The next morning, the work was a dull, constant drone, a background noise to the frantic buzzing in my head. I was meeting the team for coffee before the main presentation. I sought out Leo, the young assistant who had spilled the name. He was quiet, subdued, avoiding my gaze entirely. He apologized again, this time sober and genuinely miserable. "Claire, I am so sorry about last night. I was out of line. Andrew would kill me if he knew I mentioned studio gossip to you." "Don't worry about it, Leo," I said, trying to keep my voice flat, professional. "But you called him a hidden poet. Is Andrew John Shoots the Moon?" Leo froze mid-sip of his latte. The atmosphere around us, already tense, thickened immediately. He looked panicked, like a secret agent who just realized his cover was blown. "What? No, absolutely not," he stammered too quickly. "It's an anonymous account. We just really admire the work. Andrew sends us links sometimes. That's all. We all have our little inspirations." His lie was clumsy, frantic, and entirely unconvincing. He couldn't meet my eyes. His body language was a scream of confirmation. He knew. They all knew. And they were participating in the silence that protected Andrew's double life. I let it go. "Right, of course. It's lovely work, either way." But the interaction did two things. It confirmed the identity, and it confirmed the conspiracy of silence. The people I was working with, the professional contacts I was supposed to trust, were all implicitly agreeing to my humiliation. I was the carefully maintained fool, the quiet wife who preferred harmony so much she wouldn't dare look up from her plate. I retreated, pretending to review my notes. But my internal landscape was dissolving. I remembered a strange incident last month. Andrew had bought me a beautiful, expensive silver bracelet for my birthday, but he had insisted on an engraving, a single, small, crescent moon. I found it romantic, a reference to the moon we used to watch from our London balcony. Now I saw the moon not as a symbol of our love, but as the branding of his alter ego. It wasn't a gift of love. It was a careless, almost contemptuous detail from his other life thrown into mine. This was the terrifying realization. My entire reality had been a curated stage play, and I was merely the primary audience, paid for with years of false security. That evening, I did the one thing I had been resisting. I called Andrew. I needed to hear his voice, to feel the dissonance between the man I loved and the ghost I had uncovered. He answered instantly, his voice bright, familiar, utterly normal. "Claire, my love, how's Manchester? Did you crush the presentation?" "It went well," I said, the lie tasting sour. "I'm back at the hotel now. Just wanted to hear your voice." "Oh, I miss you, darling. Did you get my text about the gallery meeting running late tomorrow?" I leaned against the window frame, watching the Manchester traffic flow by. I was thousands of miles away, not just geographically, but emotionally. I was standing on the outside of our relationship, looking in at the elaborate structure he had built. "I got it. Listen, Andrew, I just saw something online. It was a post about a photographer. His handle is John Shoots the Moon." There was a silence on the line. This time, it wasn't the fleeting hiccup of the dinner table. It was a cavernous, deep silence. The kind of silence that confirms everything you fear. When he spoke, his voice was no longer bright. It was thin, hesitant, the sound of a carefully crafted shield cracking. "Oh, that's just a friend's side project. A collective. You know how we artists are. We experiment with anonymity." His explanation was vague, slippery. He didn't deny knowing the account. He only tried to distance himself from its ownership, pushing it onto a nameless friend or a collective. "It's beautiful work," I pressed, my heart beating so hard I thought he might hear it through the phone. "Especially the poems about the woman with the veiled eyes. She sounds like a very profound muse." His response was a half cough, a nervous shuffle. "Claire, look, I'm right in the middle of something. I've got to call you back. Tell me all about Manchester tomorrow, okay? I love you." He didn't wait for my response. The line disconnected with a sharp, ugly click. I stood there, holding the dead phone to my ear. He had run. He had fled the conversation, hiding behind a fictional meeting and the convenient distance of the miles. The click of the phone was the sound of my certainty being severed. I walked over to the desk, the glass surface reflecting the city lights. I picked up the phone again, not to call him back, but to return to his alter ego's page. The feed had just updated. A new post. It was a photograph. High contrast, moody, black and white. It was an extreme close-up of a woman's wrist, adorned with a single, fragile silver bracelet. And around the wrist, gently placed, was a man's hand. The caption was short. I see your moon, even when you hide your face. Distance is a lie. I looked down at my own wrist. The silver bracelet Andrew had given me for my birthday, the one with the crescent moon engraving, was identical. But the hand holding the wrist in the photograph, the man's hand, was not Andrew's. It was younger, perhaps, with a distinctive birthmark on the knuckle. Wait, I stared at the image, then back at the phone. My bracelet, but the hand. The final line of the post hit me like a physical blow. The sky never gave the rain it promised, but I found my harbor anyway. I sank onto the bed, staring at the picture, my silver bracelet, my moon. My eyes widened, the hand holding the wrist, the birthmark on the knuckle. I remembered Leo's clumsy, nervous hands, driving me from the station, the way he had reached for my suitcase. My vision blurred, the room swimming. It wasn't Andrew, it was someone closer, someone younger, someone who had been tasked with taking care of Claire while Andrew was away. Leo, the studio assistant, the one who had slipped the name, the one who looked at me with an awful mix of pity and fear. It wasn't Andrew who had written the poem. It wasn't Andrew who had posted the photo. Andrew was the one who controlled the account. But the woman in the mist, the muse, the one who was the real secret, the one who was being chronicled and loved. The reality hit me with the force of a train. The woman in the photos, the woman who Andrew was having an affair with, the one he was writing the poetry for, was not Leo's. It was Sophie, the project director. Andrew was cheating on me with Sophie. And Leo, the young assistant, who was so nervous, who had confessed to me that he was following the account, had accidentally revealed the name to me because he was the one who was in love with Sophie. He was the one who had taken the picture of Sophie's wrist. He was the one who had written the caption, thinking he was speaking to her. Andrew was not John Shoots the Moon. Andrew was merely the architect who allowed his protege to use his platform. Andrew used the account to connect with Sophie, writing poems about her, and allowed Leo to post his own, private, heartbreaking reflections. Because Leo was secretly, hopelessly in love with the same woman, Sophie, who was cheating with Andrew. And the entire team, including Leo and Sophie, knew the account belonged to Andrew. Leo had merely used the platform to express his own agony over Sophie. I was not the only victim. I was simply the primary and the most willfully blind one. I put the phone down gently. The sky outside the Manchester hotel was finally starting to lighten, but the promised rain still hadn't arrived. The city was a gray, unforgiving canvas. I had come all this way, searching for an answer to a question I was too afraid to ask, only to find that the hidden world was far more complex. And the betrayal was not just one line, but a vast, tangled web of silent confessions and interlocking loves. The knot in my stomach dissolved, replaced by a strange, icy calm. I closed my eyes, accepting the truth. I hadn't seen the betrayal because I hadn't wanted to believe the truth could be so close. It was right here, in Leo's eyes, in Sophie's frantic professionalism, and in Andrew's whispered lies. The name John Shoots the Moon was the key. But the lock had 2 tumblers, and they had both clicked open, revealing a tragedy far bigger than my own. I spent the rest of the night not crying, but calculating. The initial shock of Andrew's betrayal had been brutal, a direct hit. But the realization that the betrayal was interwoven with a second, equally painful tragedy, Leo's unrequited love for Sophie, chronicled unintentionally on Andrew's platform, transformed my pain into a cold, focused clarity. I was no longer just the victim of a cheating partner. I was a collateral witness to a whole ecosystem of emotional dishonesty. The message, the things we do not want to see are often the things that have been right in front of us all along, now held a terrifying new dimension. I had chosen to see the simple, perfect lie of my marriage. I had been blind to the network of lies that surrounded Andrew, the intricate tapestry he'd woven with his professional team. I had to understand the geometry of this affair. Andrew was having an affair with Sophie. The sharp, elegant project director, he used the John Shoots the Moon account, ostensibly his, given the studio's awareness, to write intimate poetry for her. Leo, the young, heartbroken assistant, was secretly in love with Sophie too. He was following the account, possibly even contributing to it with his own heartbreaking photographs and captions, believing he was speaking to Sophie through the veil of Andrew's art, or perhaps even using the platform as a form of anonymous emotional release. His slip at the dinner table was a sign of his own emotional breakdown, not a conspiracy to hurt me. He was a secondary, accidental victim of Andrew's mess. The photo of my crescent moon bracelet on Sophie's wrist, posted by Leo, confirmed the nexus. Andrew must have given the bracelet to Sophie, and then, perhaps as a form of cuss or careless guilt, bought an identical one for me. Leo, capturing his muse Sophie, had unwittingly provided the final, concrete piece of evidence. The hand with the birthmark was Leo's. He had been holding Sophie's wrist, perhaps comforting her, or simply idolizing her, while she wore the symbol of Andrew's casual duplicity. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of Andrew was what finally broke my numbness. He hadn't just cheated. He had externalized his affair, turning it into a public trending art project. He had made his mistress's love a muse, and my life a carefully excluded footnote. My goal shifted. I would not just leave Andrew. I would dismantle his performance first. I needed to gather irrefutable proof, not just for myself, but to understand why he had done this, and why the entire world had been allowed to watch. I started with the timestamps again, but this time, I focused on Sophie. Sophie was based in Leeds, about an hour away from Manchester. Andrew often had logistics meetings in the West Yorkshire area. I began searching local Manchester and Leeds news outlets for any professional or social media traces of Sophie and Andrew together, outside of the large project team. It took hours, squinting at blurry background faces in event photos from the past 6 months. Then, I found it. A grainy paparazzi-style shot from a small, regional arts awards ceremony in Leeds, 6 months ago. Andrew, laughing, his arm draped casually, possessively around Sophie's shoulders. They were standing too close for just professional colleagues. Her expression was one of private adoration. I saved the image. It was a visual dagger, simple, direct, and non-negotiable. The true weight of the situation settled upon me. Andrew was not the man who was gentle, sensitive, and who captured my light. He was a theatrical, self-obsessed narcissist who viewed love as material for his art, not a commitment. He had built his entire career on capturing authenticity, while his private life was a performance of carefully constructed lies. The internal dialogue became a torturous loop. He loves me. We have 3 years of memories. No, you have 3 years of a performance he curated. He called me my love this morning. He calls Sophie the veiled one. Which language is more honest? I chose peace. I chose not to see the minor issues. You didn't choose peace, Claire. You chose blindness. And blindness is a kind of complicity. The silence from Andrew felt louder than any argument. I knew he was waiting for me to call back, to apologize for asking the uncomfortable question, to retreat back into my comfortable role as the quiet wife. My history of avoiding confrontation was his greatest weapon. He was betting on my silence. I decided to contact Leo. He was the weak link, the accidental accomplice, the one whose conscience was clearly tearing him apart. I waited until the workday was over. I sent him a brief, non-committal text. Leo, can we talk? Just coffee. I need some clarity on the project's local team structure. He replied instantly, Of course, Claire. Tomorrow morning, before the meeting. The cafe across from the hotel? His eagerness betrayed his nervousness. He probably expected me to ask about the workflow, or perhaps to ask him to help me cover Andrew's tracks. He had no idea I was about to ask him to pull the pin on the whole grenade. My anticipation was a cold, pure dread. I knew what I was about to ask Leo to do would destroy his composure, and likely his job. But the collective silence had to end. I could no longer carry the weight of the secret that everyone else already knew. That night, alone in the hotel room, I held my phone, staring at the contact for Andrew. I could call him now. I could rage. I could scream. I could demand the truth. But I realized that Andrew's truth was meaningless. His truth was a constantly shifting narrative designed to protect his image. I needed the truth of the world. I needed the truth that had been hiding in plain sight, codified in poetry and shared on social media. For me to finally see, the betrayal was not a moment. It was a sustained, conscious choice. And my forgiveness, or lack thereof, would not be a gift to him, but a reclamation of my own sight. I had to look directly at the hidden world he'd built. I put the phone down, face up. On the screen, the notification still showed Leo's anxious reply. The coffee meeting tomorrow would be the first step in tearing down the beautiful, fragile lie that was Andrew Walker. I met Leo at the cafe, a small, bustling spot filled with the scent of roasted coffee and the sound of low, constant chatter. It was the perfect stage for a quiet, contained confrontation. I sat down at a corner table, placing my phone, screen down, next to my latte. The screen held the saved image of the two wrists, mine and Sophie's, each bearing the crescent moon, held by Leo's distinctive hand. Leo arrived a minute later, already looking defeated. He wore a heavy, anxious silence around him like a cloak. He ordered a flat white, his voice barely a whisper. He fidgeted with the sugar packets, refusing to look up. "Thanks for meeting me, Claire. About yesterday," he began, his voice laced with the apology he'd been rehearsing. "It's not about yesterday, Leo. It's about John shoots the moon," I cut in, my voice low and steady. I wasn't angry, I was surgical. The absence of rage seemed to disarm him more than any outburst. He flinched, the sugar packet dropping from his nerveless fingers. "I told you, Claire. It's an anonymous account Andrew shares with the studio. It's just art." "It's not just art, Leo," I corrected him gently, almost conversationally. "It's a diary of an affair, Andrew's affair with Sophie." The name landed like a physical blow. Leo inhaled sharply, his chest seizing. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and sick-looking. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and full of pain, a profound, unadulterated pain that had nothing to do with being caught in a lie. It was the look of a deeply wounded person. You know?" he choked out. "Everyone knows, Leo," I said, lifting the phone and sliding the screen towards him. The image of the bracelet, the two wrists, the distinct birthmark on his knuckle, stared up at him. "Everyone knows, except for me, until last night, and I know this hand is yours." He looked at his hand, then at the photo, then back at me, his composure completely shattered. He buried his face in his hands, not sobbing, but making a quiet, ragged sound of agony. "God, Claire, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I thought Andrew told everyone you already knew, that you guys had an arrangement, that you were just quietly accepting it. The casual cruelty of that lie, Andrew telling his professional circle that his wife was complicit, making me look like the accepting, silent partner in his modern, open tragedy, was worse than the act of infidelity itself. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had redefined me to the world without my permission. "We don't have an arrangement, Leo," I whispered, the coldness finally giving way to a devastating tremor in my voice. "I am the only one who didn't know. Now tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Why the name? Why the account? Why Sophie?" Leo nodded miserably, pulling his hands away. He took a long, shuddering breath. "Andrew started the account about 8 months ago. For a project, he said. But then he met Sophie at the Leeds exhibition. He became obsessed. She's different. She's exactly the kind of volatile, romantic muse Andrew has always craved. The one he writes about in his notebooks. He started using the account to write to her, secretly. The poems, the intimate photos, it was all for her. He'd post a poem and she'd respond in the DMs, or sometimes she'd send him a photo that would become the next post. "And you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Where do you fit in?" Leo swallowed, his eyes glistening. I fell for Sophie, Claire. Hard. When I joined the team 6 months ago, she was always so kind to me, so professional. I thought maybe I had a chance. But I saw the way she looked at Andrew. And then I started realizing, when Andrew would vanish, Sophie would be missing too. But the posts would still go up. He gestured vaguely at the phone. I started following the account religiously. It became my window into her world. I knew those poems weren't for Andrew's wife. They were for Sophie. It was the only way I could feel close to her. I knew the whole secret, but I kept the silence. I was just another man, hopelessly in love with the woman Andrew had claimed. "The photo," I pressed, tapping the screen. "The bracelet. Your hand. Why did you take that?" He winced. "I took that photo 2 days ago. Sophie was upset. Andrew had a row with her, something about how she needed to be more careful or something. She was crying, saying she felt like a secret, and I went to comfort her. Just as a friend, she knows I'm there for her. And I saw the bracelet. I knew it was from Andrew. The moon symbol. I took the photo. I posted it on the account with that ridiculous caption. It was a cry for help, a desperate thing. I wanted Andrew to see it, to know that someone else was watching, that someone else knew her pain, that the distance he claimed was a lie. I wanted him to be forced to choose. I never thought you would see it. His explanation was a chaotic, heartbreaking confession. It was a pure piece of human messiness. Leo wasn't a malicious conspirator. He was a heartbroken romantic who had used Andrew's platform as a proxy for his own unexpressed sorrow. I closed my eyes briefly, the scene from the dinner rushing back. They weren't looking at me out of pity for Andrew's infidelity. They were looking at me because I was the only person in the room who had no idea about the vast, tangled web of love and longing involving Andrew, Sophie, and Leo. Did Andrew know you were posting on the account? Sometimes. He didn't check the content closely. He just gave us access to keep the feed moving when he was busy. He called it crowdsourcing, but it was just carelessness, Claire. He didn't care enough about his secret to keep it tight. The coffee was getting cold. I looked at Leo, this young man whose own life had been derailed by the same man who was shattering mine. He was a mirror reflecting a different, equally valid pain. Thank you, Leo, I said, my voice firming up. You just gave me the truth, which is more than Andrew ever did. I stood up, leaving the phone on the table. You don't have to worry about your job. I won't say anything. This is between me and Andrew. I paused. But be careful, Leo. Don't confuse being a martyr for being a lover. That account, it's not a path to Sophie. It's just Andrew's trash bin. I left him there, sitting in the warm, bright cafe, utterly exposed. Walking back to the hotel, the morning mist had finally lifted, revealing a cold, clear Manchester sky. My head was clearer too. Andrew's narrative of the open arrangement was a lie to protect his reputation. His artistry was merely a sophisticated cloak for his casual duplicity. I went back to my room, picked up my phone, and looked at the latest post from John Shoots the Moon. The photo of the two wrists, my bracelet, his hand. I was no longer angry at Leo. I was done with silence. I was ready to face Andrew. The truth, once revealed by Leo in the hushed, coffee-scented air of the cafe, settled over me with a strange, heavy tranquility. It was the calm of devastation, the quiet after a structure has finally collapsed, leaving behind only dust and clear, unobstructed sky. The truth was no longer a burning question. It was a cold, hard, factual answer, and with it came the bitter clarity of profound self-realization. I walked the streets of Manchester, a city I barely knew, but whose grey, industrial sincerity now felt more honest than the polished veneer of my life in London. I wasn't just walking away from Leo and his confession. I was walking away from the Claire who existed 3 years ago. The Claire who believed that choosing peace meant turning a blind eye to discomfort. My internal world became a rapid, brutal interrogation. The memories of my life with Andrew, the quiet dinners, the shared jokes, the spontaneous weekend trips, didn't disappear. Instead, they were re-edited, their metadata corrupted. I looked back at moments of supposed intimacy and saw instead the tiny, almost imperceptible signs of his withdrawal, his emotional absence, the space where he was drafting the next poem for the woman in the mist. I remembered the time Andrew had insisted on spending a whole Sunday alone, claiming he needed to process the visual noise of the city to achieve creative clarity. I had respected his need for solitude, seeing it as the gentle eccentricity of an artist. Now I saw it as a calculated window of time to meet Sophie, to share the stolen moments that formed the basis of his wildly popular, secret online narrative. His art wasn't a separate pursuit. It was the documented performance of his infidelity. The profound humiliation wasn't just that he cheated. It was that he had made my blindness public. Everyone knew. Leo, Sophie, the entire Manchester creative team, and thousands of online followers, that Andrew Walker, the celebrated photographer, maintained a parallel world and kept his wife, Claire, in a state of carefully managed ignorance. I was the backdrop, the static element in his dynamic artistic life, the silent partner who enabled his pretense of sensitivity while he was, in fact, simply selfish and careless. The concept of John Shoots the Moon itself became the ultimate metaphor for Andrew's cruelty, and he wasn't just capturing the moon, he was capturing the unattainable, the side of Sophie that was only visible in the dark, stolen moments, while leaving me, his wife, entirely uncaptured, unwritten, and unseen. He had preferred the veiled romance of the moon to the steady, reliable sun of our marriage. My mind fixated on the phrase Leo had uttered. Andrew told everyone you already knew that you guys had an arrangement. This lie was a shield, a social defense mechanism that transformed Andrew from a conventional cheat into a modern, emotionally mature man whose marriage was simply misunderstood. It neatly placed the burden of complicity on me, turning my quiet nature into a sign of acceptance rather than ignorance. This was the most unforgivable act: the theft of my narrative, the manipulation of my identity. I knew, deep down, that the root of this long-running deception was my own intense, almost obsessive, desire for harmony. I was the person who always chose the path of least resistance, the one who feared the noise of confrontation more than the quiet rot of a lie. Andrew hadn't needed to be an expert deceiver. He simply needed to exploit my established voluntary pattern of avoidance. I hadn't seen the truth because I hadn't dared to look, terrified that the fragile, beautiful illusion of our life together would shatter. My passivity had created the perfect breeding ground for his secrecy. The sheer scale of the lie demanded a response that was equally large, equally public. This couldn't be a quiet, private scene of two people shouting in a kitchen. The confrontation had to be as sharp, as cutting, and as visible as the art he had created. He needed to be forced to look at the wreckage he had made, not just of my life, but of Leo's emotional stability and Sophie's own compromised dignity. I returned to my hotel room and began the meticulous, agonizing process of detachment. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't book a ticket back to London yet. That would be retreating, running back to the safe ground. This time, I had to plant my feet firmly in the chaos he had created. I pulled up the John Shoots the Moon account again. I scrolled through the posts one last time, no longer seeking answers, but collecting ammunition. The photograph of the chipped ceramic mug in Liverpool. The poem about the stolen sunset over a city view from a Saturday he claimed to be scouting locations. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming, a testament to his lack of respect. He had treated the truth like litter, scattered carelessly across the internet. Confident I would never stoop to pick it up, I saw a new post, a short, philosophical musing about the difficulty of maintaining creative integrity in long-term relationships. It was a clear, direct reference to me, a justification of his affair disguised as artistic struggle. The sheer audacity of his self-pity made me physically recoil. It was the final straw. His narrative always placed him in the center, the tormented artist, with everyone else, myself included, as merely supporting characters in his journey. I realized that my confrontation couldn't be about his infidelity. That was a vulgar, common crime. My focus had to be on the lie of his character and the silence of my complicity. I had to prove to him that I was no longer the woman who would choose harmony over truth. I opened my laptop and began drafting a message. Not to Andrew, but to Sophie. I quickly deleted it. That was messy, emotional, and gave her too much power. My fight was not with the mistress. It was with the author of the deception. I focused on Andrew's official email, the one he used for all professional contracts and gallery correspondence. It was the address that represented Andrew Walker, the respected artist, the brand he so carefully cultivated. I began to construct a single, devastating email, meticulously detailing every piece of evidence I had collected, cross-referencing his scouting trips with the poetic posts, citing the specific timestamps, and describing the context of Leo's confession. The email was a cold, objective report, devoid of emotion, a professional audit of his personal failure. I referenced the Leeds Awards photo, the chipped mug, the exact language used in his public poetry that only Sophie would understand. I listed the names: Sophie, Leo, the Manchester team. The message needed to be undeniable, proving that my knowledge was complete, not based on jealous suspicion, but on empirical evidence gathered from the very medium he had used to mask his deceit. I needed to shock him out of his complacent belief that he could control the narrative. I then went through my own social media. I deleted all the photos of Andrew and me, not out of anger, but out of a desire to reclaim my space, to erase the visual evidence of a life that never truly existed. This was my first physical act of separation, the quiet demolition of the shared history. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering the last shreds of my courage. I went through the mental rehearsal of the conversation, anticipating his inevitable tactics: denial, minimization, shifting the blame onto my emotional unavailability, and finally, the artist's defense, that it was all creative exploration. I was ready for all of it. My quiet nature was now my greatest asset. My composure, my preference for silence, would become the calm before the storm. I would force him into the high-volume, messy confrontation he always avoided, while I remained the cool, clinical observer. I decided to send the email at 10 p.m. London time. It was an hour when he would be home, probably relaxed, enjoying the quiet of the flat without me, perhaps texting Sophie. The impact needed to be immediate, personal, and devastatingly intrusive into his false sense of security. As the hour approached, I didn't feel rage or sadness. I felt an intense, burning clarity. I was no longer Claire, the woman who sought harmony. I was Claire, the woman who sought the truth, no matter the cost. My vision had been blurred by love, but now the lens was sharp, unforgiving, and focused entirely on the hypocrisy of the man I had married. I looked at the window. The mist was back, shrouding the Manchester skyline in a soft, diffused light. It was the perfect atmosphere for his art, a beautiful concealment. But I wasn't looking at the mist anymore. I was looking through it. I saw the sharp edges of the buildings, the cold reality underneath the veil. The time hit 10 p.m. I read the email one last time. Subject: the resonance of the invisible fractures. It was a nod to his poetic language, a way of telling him that his own words were now being used as the instruments of his destruction. I pressed send. The click of the keyboard echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of a lock breaking. I didn't wait for his response. I picked up my phone and called him, ensuring that he would receive the professional audit of his life right before I spoke to him. He had chosen the stage of social media for his lie. I was choosing the final, inescapable stage of the personal call. My hand was steady. My heart was calm. I had retrieved my light. The phone rang instantly, not a moment of hesitation. He hadn't even finished reading the entire email. The subject line alone, the resonance of the invisible fractures, and the cold, professional tone of the opening paragraph must have sent a jolt of pure panic through him. I let it ring 3 times, allowing the full weight of the evidence I had just delivered to settle in his mind. Then I answered, "Claire, what the hell is this? What is this email?" His voice was sharp, frantic, stripped of the gentle, artistic drawl he usually maintained. It was the voice of a man cornered, terrified of the public fallout more than the private pain. "It's an audit, Andrew," I replied. My voice perfectly level, calm, almost bored. This calmness was my shield, the ultimate weapon against his predictable theatrics. "A professional summary of the findings from the last 8 months of your extracurricular activities." I felt the need for clarity, since clarity is the thing you're supposedly always capturing. "You've been spying on me? Going through my projects? Claire, this is insane. This is a gross invasion of my privacy. My art is private." He resorted immediately to the artist's defense, the predictable pivot to self-victimization. "Your art is a public platform, Andrew," I countered, not letting him gain an inch. "And the John Shoots the Moon account is not private art. It's a public monument to your deception. Co-authored by your mistress Sophie and your heartbroken assistant Leo. I have the receipts, Andrew. I have the timestamps. I have the geographical cross-references. I even have the photo of the crescent moon bracelet you gave Sophie, the one identical to mine, taken by Leo, the same Leo you told your team I was in an open arrangement with." The line went silent. This silence was different from the one at the dinner table, or the one after his initial lie. This was the sound of a man who realized the game was over, the curtain had been pulled back, and the audience was staring not at the magic, but at the cheap wires and smoke machine. When he finally spoke, the panic had morphed into a low, manipulative plea. "Claire, listen to me. This isn't what you think. It started as art. It was never about abandoning you. You know how our life is. It's safe, it's steady. But I'm an artist. I need tension. I need that spark, that raw, volatile energy that Sophie offers. You gave me peace, and I love you for that. But peace is stagnant. I needed to feel again, to create the resonance you wrote about in the subject line." "Don't use my words against me, Andrew," I said, my voice cutting through his self-pity. "And don't insult me with the artist's defense. You didn't cheat because you needed tension for your art. You cheated because you needed admiration that was greater than the respect of your wife. You needed a secret world to make yourself feel important, and you used your art to validate your selfishness. I paused, letting my next words sink in slowly, deliberately. The unforgivable part isn't the infidelity, Andrew. It's the silence. The silence you cultivated in me, and the silence you imposed on your entire team. You made me the blind partner, the object of pity, the woman who was too committed to harmony to see the public nature of her own destruction. You told the world I was complicit. That is the true crime, Andrew, the theft of my dignity. He tried one last, desperate attempt to regain control. We can fix this, Claire. Come home. We'll talk. We can go to counseling. We don't have to let this leak out. We don't have to destroy everything we built. Everything you built was a lie, Andrew, I corrected him. It was a fragile structure built entirely on my willingness to be blind. And I am no longer blind. I saw the truth not just about you, but about me. I was so afraid of confrontation that I became a willing participant in my own humiliation. I chose the comfort of the known lie over the terror of the unknown truth. But the truth was right there, in front of me, in the form of a ridiculous online handle. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, the sound of a man realizing he had truly lost. The divorce papers will be drawn up immediately, I continued, my voice taking on the professional, clinical tone I used in high-stakes marketing meetings. Don't contact me, and don't contact Leo or Sophie, or I will ensure the full details, including your explicit professional abuses, are made public. You valued your image more than my heart, Andrew. Now you will lose both. I didn't wait for his response this time. I hung up. The click was not an ugly severance like the night before. It was the sharp, clean sound of a door slamming shut. A chapter ending, a life being violently but definitively reclaimed. I sat back on the hotel bed, staring into the impersonal expanse of the room. My body was shaking, but not from fear. It was the deep, physical reverberation of a long-suppressed earthquake finally being released. I had chosen confrontation. I had chosen noise. And in that choice, I found a strange, unexpected peace. I picked up my phone one last time. I navigated back to X and the John Shoots the Moon account. It was still there. The latest post about the distance being a lie. The picture of my bracelet on Sophie's wrist. I didn't block Andrew's official number. I didn't need to. That was the ghost of the man I loved. But I blocked at John Shoots the Moon. I erased the account from my awareness, severing the last public link to his hidden world. The poems, the photos, the entire narrative, it belonged to the internet now, not to me. I walked over to the window. The mist was gone. The Manchester sky was dark, vast, and uncompromisingly clear, scattered with the distant, cold light of city stars. I was alone, thousands of miles from the life I thought I had, with nothing but a packed suitcase and a shattered illusion. I whispered the final conclusion of my journey, a deep, silent monologue aimed at the cold glass. I realized then that the sky never gave the rain it promised. It never delivered the dramatic, cleansing storm I had secretly waited for, the one that would wash away the lies and make everything simple again. Life isn't a neat, cinematic event. It doesn't give you the clean resolution. But I learned to walk under that dry, cold sky anyway. I had found my own harbor, not in a perfect relationship, but in the terrifying, stark clarity of the truth. I had chosen to see the things that were right in front of me, and in that act of seeing, I finally became the protagonist of my own story. The phone call with Andrew had been the detonation. Now came the resonance, the slow, lingering sound of structural collapse. I spent the next 24 hours in Manchester in a state of hyperclarity. The calmness that had settled over me was not peace. It was the quiet, terrifying emptiness after all feeling has been expelled. I had done the hardest part. I had looked directly at the sun of the truth and not blinked. My first act of reclamation was not legal or emotional. It was physical. I went to a high-end jeweler in the city center. I placed the silver bracelet with the crescent moon engraving on the velvet counter. It felt gold, heavy and tainted. I didn't want to keep it as a trophy of betrayal or a symbol of loss. It was Andrew's signature, and I wanted to erase it from my person. I sold it, and the money was irrelevant. The act of severing the physical tie to his artistic lie was everything. Later that day, I sent an email to my London-based solicitor. The email was short, efficient, and entirely without emotion, mirroring the tone I had used with Andrew. I instructed her to begin the divorce proceedings immediately and to cite marital misconduct based on documented digital evidence, including the public-facing nature of his secret life. I copied the saved image of the Leeds Awards ceremony and the list of cross-referenced poetic posts. I was not seeking revenge. I was seeking absolute, irreversible separation. The true work, however, was in the internal dialogue. I had to permanently silence the part of me that still argued for Andrew, the small, desperate voice that pointed to the 3 years of genuine affection and companionship. I realized that even the good parts were now suspect. They were the gentle padding he had laid down to keep the noise of his secret life from reaching me. Every quiet moment was simply a space between his louder, more passionate moments with Sophie. The central lie I had lived under, the one where my choice of harmony was a sign of relationship strength, had to be dismantled entirely. I realized that my refusal to engage in conflict had given Andrew permission to create the parallel world. My desire for peace had made me passive, and passivity in the face of profound dishonesty is indistinguishable from complicity. This acknowledgement was the most painful part of my solitude, a bitter, essential pill of self-forgiveness. I had been blind, but I had also made myself an easy target. My next step was to address Leo. I had promised him silence regarding his job, but I owed him more than that. I owed him the harsh, unvarnished clarity he had given me. He was still a young man, romantic and easily manipulated, wasting his emotions on a woman who was complicit in a cynical game. I called him late that afternoon. He answered instantly, his voice low and fearful. "Claire, is everything okay? Did you talk to him?" "I talked to him, Leo. It's over. I've filed for divorce," I stated simply. "And I kept my word. Your name is safe. Your job is safe." There was a long pause. "Thank you, Claire. I don't know what to say. I'm truly sorry." "You don't owe me an apology, Leo. Andrew does. But you owe yourself some truth. That's why I called." I took a deep breath. "Leo, Sophie is never going to choose you. She's with Andrew because he represents the drama, the status, the artistic validation she craves. You are the gentle comfort, the emotional support, the man who watches from the shadows and cleans up the mess. That poem you posted, the one about the moon being hidden, it was beautiful. But it wasn't a cry for help to Andrew. It was a silent confession to Sophie, and she ignored it, because she doesn't want the quiet love you offer. She wants the chaos Andrew creates." My words were surgical, delivered not with malice, but with the cold, necessary realism of a mentor. I had spent 24 hours analyzing Andrew's ecosystem, and I understood its toxic geometry better than anyone. You used that account because you believed art could bridge the distance between you and Sophie. It can't. Art only documents the distance. You need to block John Shoots the Moon. Block Sophie. You need to leave that studio and find a place where your talent isn't being used to fuel Andrew's massive ego and Sophie's selfish needs. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the faint static of the connection. I see her every day, Claire. It's hard. Then you must leave, Leo, I insisted. Your loyalty to that studio is loyalty to Andrew's lie. Andrew is a masterful narcissist. He'll keep you and Sophie close, feeding off your admiration and her volatility. He's designed a system where he is always the center of gravity. You have to remove yourself from his orbit entirely. Andrew Walker is not the lighthouse. He is the whirlpool. I delivered the final line. You confessed your pain to me, Leo, a woman you barely knew, because the people closest to you are incapable of real intimacy. Now take the courage you showed me and use it to save yourself. Don't confuse being a martyr for being a lover. Go. He gave a soft, shaky laugh, a sound of profound relief mixed with sudden, terrifying freedom. The whirlpool. You're right. I think I will resign, Claire. Today, before I go back to London. Good, I said. Go home, Leo. Find your own light, and don't let anyone capture it for their own gain. I hung up, feeling a lightness I hadn't expected. It was the weight of a complicated human mess being lifted from my shoulders. I had done the only thing I could do. I had shared the terrible clarity of the truth with another victim, cutting one more thread of Andrew's elaborate web. I sat by the window, the Manchester streetlights blurring into soft, indistinct halos. The city, which had felt so alien just days ago, now felt like a cradle of radical self-discovery. I had been stripped down to my essential core, the woman who values truth above all else, even above her own perceived happiness. I realized that the quiet moments of my marriage hadn't been peace. They had been camouflage. The true, genuine peace was this: the complete, self-possessed certainty that I was alone, but free, finally seeing the world without the soft, distorting filter of Andrew's manipulative love. I was ready to leave Manchester, not as a woman in flight, but as a woman who had completed an essential, painful mission. I was ready to claim my new life, starting with the quiet, devastating clarity of a hard-won truth. The remainder of the day was a slow, deliberate shedding of the old self. I refused to let the immediate aftermath of the confrontation be dramatic or hurried. Andrew, predictable as ever, had begun a barrage of frantic emails, not apologies, but pleas for a private conversation, justifications of his artistic temperament, and warnings about the consequences of a messy divorce on his reputation. I created a separate folder in my email client labeled Archive, the Whirlpool. Every message from him, every desperate text, every attempt to manipulate my guilt or fear went directly there, unread. My solicitor was now the gatekeeper. I had outsourced the mess, allowing myself the sacred space of silence I had unknowingly craved for years. The realization that his concern was purely professional, the fear that the full, ugly truth of his deceit, including the misuse of his assistant and the exploitation of his mistress's vulnerability for artistic fodder, would destroy his carefully curated image, was the final nail in the coffin of my love. It wasn't my pain he feared. It was the scandal. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ate dinner alone, not distracted by a phone or a book, but simply sitting in the hotel restaurant, watching the quiet flow of life around me. The small, ordinary luxury of solitude tasted like freedom. I ordered a glass of expensive, complex wine. It felt like a toast to the woman I was becoming, sharp, uncompromising, and unafraid of her own company. I reflected on my confrontation with Leo. The young man's pain, while heartbreaking, was a direct reflection of my own former passivity. He had chosen to be the silent admirer, the observer who never dared to step into the light and claim his own desire. I had chosen to be the silent wife, the observer who never dared to step into the light and claim her right to the truth. Andrew's world was only possible because people like Leo and I preferred the narrative of unspoken longing or quiet harmony over the messy reality of confrontation. This was the core lesson. The true violence wasn't the act of cheating. It was the prolonged, quiet violence of self-deception. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I didn't need an alarm. I felt physically lighter, as if a great, invisible weight had been removed from my internal architecture. I dressed slowly, choosing an outfit that was sharp and professional, a uniform for the woman who now demanded to be seen. I went down to the lobby and checked out. My reservation was for another 3 days, but I needed to leave. Manchester was no longer a city of business or revelation. It was simply the place where the illusion ended. I didn't book a train back to London. I decided instead to drive to the coast, to find a small, temporary quiet space before facing the logistics of dismantling my former life. Before I left the city limits, I drove slowly past the cafe where I had met Leo. It was bustling, filled with the early morning life of the northern quarter. I smiled faintly. I hoped Leo had listened, that he had chosen to step out of the whirlpool before it dragged him under completely. I had given him the gift of clarity. His choice was now his own responsibility. My journey took me north, towards the rugged coastline of the Lake District, away from the soft, controlled light of Andrew's artistic world. The landscape was vast, unforgiving, and real. The roads were challenging, demanding my full attention, forcing me to focus entirely on the present moment, on the physical reality of the steering wheel and the winding asphalt. I parked the car overlooking a cliff, the gray North Sea churning below. The wind was fierce, cold, and clean. It whipped my hair around my face and tore the remaining vestiges of self-pity from my soul. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the tumultuous water. It was the storm I had been waiting for, not in the sky, but in the sea, a wild, untamed energy that resonated with the inner storm I had just survived. I pulled out my phone one last time, opening the gallery where I had stored the evidence. The final image I stared at was the close-up of my wrist, the one Andrew had bought for my birthday, the one with the engraved crescent moon, the very bracelet I had sold just hours ago. I looked at the image, then out at the sky. The moon was nowhere to be seen, lost to the bright, uncompromising light of the late morning. I realized the significance of the crescent moon. It was a symbol of incompletion. Andrew hadn't wanted a whole love. He had only wanted the small, secretive sliver of light and shadow that suited his current artistic narrative. He had only ever been interested in the part of a story he could capture and curate. I deleted the image. Then I deleted the entire folder. The evidence was safe with my solicitor. I didn't need the digital record anymore. I had the emotional record, carved into my memory with painful, unforgettable precision. The truth was now part of my internal landscape, uneditable and immutable. I lifted my head, letting the wind carry the final fragments of my old life away. I spoke the words I had formulated in the loneliness of my hotel room, the quiet crystallization of the entire journey. Some moons are not meant to be captured. Some truths are not meant to be turned into poetry. They are meant to be seen, accepted, and then left behind. It wasn't a declaration of war or a vow of bitterness. It was simply a statement of fact, the final, undeniable premise of my new life. I turned away from the vast, turbulent sea and walked back to the car. I was heading into the next chapter, undefined and unwritten, without the false comfort of a familiar hand or the deceptive glow of a parallel world. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I was truly whole. The silence was no longer a sign of avoidance. It was a profound, powerful testament to my self-possession. The road ahead was clear, and I began to drive, not looking back at the city, the sea, or the shadow of the man I had left behind. The drive away from the coast was a journey into the future, unburdened by the rear-view mirror. I stopped for the night in a small, anonymous town, choosing a hotel that was utterly impersonal, a place where no memory of Andrew or the shared past could possibly reside. I slept deeply, soundly, for the first time in months. The absence of a secret, of a lie I was unconsciously guarding, was the most luxurious comfort I had ever known. In the quiet of the next morning, over a solitary breakfast, I realized that my life had been fundamentally reset. Andrew hadn't just taken 3 years. He had inadvertently given me a new, profound perspective on my own character. He had forced me to see the Claire who prioritized comfort over truth, the woman who was willing to live in the shadow of a lie just to maintain the illusion of harmony. The message I had been meant to convey in this story, the one that had guided my internal monologue, now crystallized into a universal truth. The things we do not want to see are often the things that have been right in front of us all along, and the act of seeing is the only true act of liberation. Andrew, the artist, the man obsessed with capturing things, light, shadow, emotional tension, had ultimately failed to capture the one thing that mattered: authenticity. He had tried to frame his betrayal as art, his mistress as a muse, and his wife as a character in his self-pitying narrative. But art only works when the audience accepts the lie. Once the audience, I, John Ninswinqua Lovobok, Tuan Botak Famko Anta Subdo, I thought of Leo, the young romantic who idolized the account. I hoped he was safe, having escaped the whirlpool. His pain was genuine, a testament to the fact that people are often wounded not by direct malice, but by the casual, self-absorbed carelessness of others. His eventual freedom would be the second, quiet victory in this messy war. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The divorce would be messy, public, and expensive. There would be whispers, rumors, and the inevitable public scrutiny of Andrew's professional life, which was inextricably linked to his infidelity. But the fear of that noise no longer held any power over me. I had survived the worst noise of all, the shattering sound of my own core belief system breaking apart. I packed my minimal belongings and started the final leg of the journey, not back to the flat in London, that was no longer home, but to a temporary, rented space I had arranged via email. The act of moving into an unknown space, of starting completely from scratch, felt exhilarating. As I drove, I allowed myself one final moment of reflection on the recurring motif of the story: the veil, the mist, the hidden world. Andrew's art was built on the premise of veiled sorrow and hidden secrets. He romanticized the things that were kept out of sight. I had, ironically, lived my life the same way, veiling my own discomfort and silencing my own intuition for the sake of a tranquil image. But the real world, the world I was now entering, was not veiled. It was raw, honest, and demanding. It required me to step out of the shadows and choose a life where my quiet nature was a strength of observation, not a tool for avoidance. The story wasn't about the affair. It was about the journey from intentional blindness to absolute clarity. My time in Manchester had not been a business trip, it had been a crucible. I reached the temporary apartment late in the afternoon. It was small, bright, and utterly impersonal, yet it felt more like home than the meticulously curated flat I had shared with Andrew. I set down my suitcase, the one containing my entire life for the past 3 years. I walked to the window, opened it wide, and let the sounds of the busy city wash over me. The noise was real, chaotic, and loud. It was the sound of 1,000 lives being lived, messy and unscripted. I closed my eyes and whispered the final lesson, the core resonance I would carry forward. Andrew sought the moon, the fragmented, hidden, romanticized light. But the moon only borrows its glow. I have chosen the sun, the full, uncompromising, and absolutely honest light of day, and I will never again mistake a shadow for a sanctuary. I had reclaimed my sight, and in doing so, I had finally found my truest self.